I want to close by introducing our speaker and telling you about 2 days I'm never going to forget. The first day was January 6th, this year. You remember what happened? The former president called a little rally together. Thousands of people came from across the United States, and they rallied somewhere near the White House. And then the president pointed to Capitol Hill and said, "Go to Capitol Hill." He knew what was taking place at that moment. We were officially counting the electoral votes. He sent that mob up to disrupt Congress and to stop their constitutional responsibility. But he failed. He failed. The men and women in Congress came together and did their duty. But in the hours of fear and concern with this insurrectionist mob in Washington, many of us were taken to a room where Democrats and Republicans spent several hours waiting for the safe return to the Senate. We got the news while we were waiting in that room that we had just won an election contest in the state of Georgia. It was an election contest that gave us 2 seats in the state of Georgia and took us to the number 50 in terms of the number of Democratic senators, who, with, God bless her, Kamala Harris, the deciding vote as our vice president, we now, for the first time, had a working majority to give Joe Biden. The good news, of course, was about Jon Ossoff, amazing individual who ran a determined campaign for the House of Representatives and then came back and ran against an incumbent Republican senator. Did it make a difference? It's the second day I remember. It was Biden's rescue plan, the $1 trillion plan for Illinois and America to get back on its feet. We passed that. All the Democrats voted for it, not a single Republican. And I remember, and I'm sure he'll never forget as well, in that small enclosure, that well of the Senate where we stand and vote, the Democratic members moved over to Raphael Warnock and to Jon Ossoff, and they said, "This change in America would never have happened were it not for your election." They made history. He's Mr. Majority. He's our welcome guest at the Illinois Democratic Day. Come on, Mr. Senator Jon Ossoff.
Good morning, Illinois Democrats. Good morning. Thank you, Senator Durbin, for that kind introduction. Senator Durbin leads in the Senate and serves Illinois with tireless distinction. And Dick, I'm grateful for your friendship. And Illinois Democrats, you have an immediate and urgent task before you, because the country is counting on you to re-elect Senator Tammy Duckworth, an American hero, in 2022. Thank you, Tammy, for all you've done. Thank you for your extraordinary service and sacrifice. And speaking of service and sacrifice, as we sit here this morning, there are thousands of American service members risking their lives to secure the airport in Kabul, Afghanistan, so that American citizens and Afghan allies who fought alongside our forces can be airlifted to safety. Will you please join me in recognizing and honoring all the veterans and military personnel in attendance today? Thank you. Congresswoman Kelly, Congresswoman Bustos, Congresswoman Underwood, a rising star and an old friend of mine now, Congressman Krishnamurti, Governor Pritzker, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, Senator Harmon, Speaker Welsh, distinguished guests, thank you for welcoming me this morning. I bring greetings and gratitude from the great state of Georgia. And I see y'all with your fans. If you think this is hot, come on down to the South. I bring gratitude for the thousands of you who worked your hearts out, making calls, writing postcards, chipping in what you could to help Georgians defy the odds, elect 2 Democratic senators, secure a Senate majority, and get America back on track. And let's just put things in perspective. 8 months ago, Donald Trump controlled nuclear weapons. 8 months ago, 5,000 Americans were dying per day of COVID-19. Millions of families were on the brink of ruin, and our country's divisions led to a constitutional crisis. But in the last 6 months, we've acted with speed and clarity of purpose to address that crisis. We rushed relief checks directly to families, surged billions of dollars to public schools and healthcare providers stretched thin by this pandemic. We re-empowered health experts and made the COVID-19 vaccine free and available for every single American. After Republicans passed tax cuts for the rich and corporations, Democrats passed one of the largest middle-class tax cuts in American history. And despite the divisions in our politics, the Senate passed the most ambitious infrastructure bill in half a century by an overwhelming bipartisan majority, proving that America's political leadership can rise above party to serve our national interest. Thank you for all you've done to make this progress possible. And Illinois Dems, my gratitude runs even deeper than all you did to help us win in Georgia in January, because many of you have supported us in Georgia for years. You helped me when I ran for the House in 2017, a kid no one had heard of, running in a deep red district with a name the local Republican mayor said sounded too foreign ever to get elected in Georgia. And I lost that race, but we kept fighting, and what we built laid the groundwork for progress. In a state that hadn't elected a Democratic senator in 20 years, Reverend Raphael Warnock and I built the largest grassroots army in our state's history. We marshaled more than 50,000 volunteers to get out the vote like never before. My campaign recruited, hired, and trained nearly 3,000 young and diverse community mobilizers living in all of Georgia's 159 counties, an unprecedented peer-to-peer organizing program that employed thousands, empowering them with technology to mobilize their friends, family, colleagues, and church members to the polls. We threw out the old playbook, and we ran a fearless campaign focused relentlessly on health, jobs, and justice for the people. Health, jobs, and justice for all the people of Georgia. We carried the banner of equal justice, civil rights, and voting rights to every county in our state, running in the footsteps and standing on the shoulders of giants like Congressman John Lewis, who told me before he passed that he believed we would win. It was the biggest Senate race in modern history, fought at a moment of profound crisis. Empowered by that grassroots army rising to a historic obligation, Georgia voters voted like they'd never voted before. Black voters made to stand in line for 6, 8, 10 hours, withstood the elements and defied the injustice that persists in our electoral system to demand new representation. And so my state, a state that was both the cradle of the civil rights movement and the heart of the old Confederacy, elected a black pastor and the young Jewish son of an immigrant, delivering the 49th and 50th votes in the United States Senate and laying the foundations for our nation's recovery after 4 years of misrule and amidst the worst public health crisis in generations. That's what we did on January 5th, Illinois. That's what we did on January 5th. But as Senator Durbin reminded you, the results weren't clear until the next morning, on January 6th. My wife Alicia was still working an overnight shift at Grady Hospital in Atlanta delivering babies, so I sat alone at my house watching the networks project our victories while a violent mob assaulted the US Capitol and our Constitution. And thank God, and thanks to the brave members of Congress on this stage, our Constitution survived. And 2 weeks later on the Senate floor, I was sworn in by Vice President Kamala Harris with my hand on a Hebrew prayer book that had belonged to a Georgia rabbi named Jacob Rothschild. Rabbi Rothschild had led the temple, the Atlanta synagogue that my family attended. And it was under his leadership in 1958 that the temple was bombed by white supremacists in retaliation for the rabbi's alliance with Dr. King. And the next day, in response to the temple bombing, Dr. King sent a telegram to President Eisenhower. He called for a White House conference on race relations that Dr. King said, quote, could revive for the citizens of our country and the freedom-loving peoples of the world the great American heritage of justice, law, and order, and could help recommit our nation to the peaceful settling of differences, which is the only method consistent with constitutional democracy. Dr. King's words, one day after the temple in Atlanta was bombed. Recommit our nation to the peaceful settling of differences, which is the only method consistent with constitutional democracy. That was true in 1958. The events of the last 6 months, the events of the last 4 years prove that it's true now. So Illinois Democrats, I want you to say this with me. Say, now is the time.
Now is the time.
Say, now is the time.
Now is the time.
Now is the time for that same spirit of revival and recommitment. In a country deeply wounded by the politics of fear and division, faced with the task of building a just and sustainable and flourishing world, now is the time to make fully real at long last America's foundational promises of equal rights and equal justice for all. And those are the promises that still draw dreamers and strivers and pioneers and refugees from all over the world to our shores. Equal rights and equal justice for all. I mentioned this to Dick yesterday, but I flew here by way of O'Hare. And on the little regional jet to Springfield, I was sitting across the aisle from a young Lithuanian woman. She was on the final leg of her journey around the world to spend a year living in rural Illinois. She was dreaming about the opportunity she could pursue, maybe the life that she would build in our country. And I just couldn't get over the fact that this young woman was from Lithuania, Dick. Because she reminded me of another young woman who came to America from Lithuania, Anna Kutkin, Senator Dick Durbin's mother. And she reminded me of two young Lithuanians, Annie and Israel Ossoff, my great-grandparents, who fled Eastern Europe and arrived in America in 1911 and 1913. And she reminded me of my own mother, who immigrated alone to this country as a young woman, just 23 years old. My mother came to this country because she believed in America. And the last 4 years just about broke her heart. But she still believes in America. So do I. So do all of you, or you wouldn't be here today. So Illinois Democrats, say it with me again. Say, now is the time.
Now is the time.
Now is the time to build on our shared humanity as our most important identity, because politics based on love is the way and the only way forward. Now is the time to prioritize education and enlightenment, to raise our standards, to meet new challenges, to make daycare and pre-kindergarten education available to every single family in this country, to assure that all with the will can work to access a full scholarship, learn a trade, and build a career. Now is the time and our last chance to address climate change and avert environmental disaster, Illinois. Now is the time to pass a new Voting Rights Act and a new Civil Rights Act to make real those promises of equal rights and equal justice. Now is the time to believe again, Illinois, to push this country to higher and higher heights. Thank you for having me. God bless you, and I can't wait to come back.